Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to build a gazebo. It took many, many hours to complete the wood shingling of the roof. Because remember, every course had to be braided 8 times over those hips. But I think all the effort was worth it. Because when you approach a gazebo, after all, it's the roof that you notice first. I've already started setting the trim and the lattice panels. Let me show you that. The first thing I want to do is put a corner board on the outside of each post. Now, if you remember from the first program, I beveled the 4x6 posts so that they would be square to each segment of the octagon. Now what I want to do is take the scrap piece of material that resulted from making that bevel and fill in the outside. I'll hold the thin part of the bevel even with the edge of the post, and that will give me a 90-degree corner right here. Now a word about safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these, safety glasses. Now the corner boards themselves are pieces that have been ripped at a 22.5-degree angle so that they'll fit together just like this to fit over the corner. Now I could nail them in place as they are, but it would be very difficult to keep the outside edge aligned. So what I'm going to do is cut some biscuit slots to help align the two pieces. Okay, now we can put in some biscuits. I'm not going to use any glue. These biscuits are really just to align the two boards. The nails will actually hold them together. Okay, now I've put a little mark on the decking, which is a 1/2 inch beyond the post, which is the overlap that I want. So with that aligned, just nail it in place. Now the nails that I'm using are 6-penny stainless steel ring shank. They'll never rust. Now this piece of 2x4 that I've notched each end on to fit around the corner board will just become a nailer for some other pieces of trim. Just secured with screws. The next thing I want to do is set the lattice railing panels, and they sit on some little blocks. Okay, now I can take the lattice panel and set it from the inside against the corner board and on top of the blocks. Then take some shingle tips and just wedge it in place. Now this piece of pine trim has also been notched on each end, and it sits under the 2x4 that I installed earlier. Next, a couple fillers on each side of the opening at the top. The next thing is the upper lattice panel, which has a decorative arch, and that gets tacked in place with a couple brads. Okay, now I can remove this temporary cleat, which is really just necessary to hold the arch until it was installed. You're probably wondering how I made this decorative arch and the lattice railing panel. Here's how it was done. The railing panels start out as 4 pieces of 1 inch thick by 1 3/8 wide cedar. And the first thing I want to do is plow a groove down the center to receive the lattice panel. And I'll run all 4 side pieces. Okay, that takes care of the miters on the frame pieces. Now the lattice panel. Because there are 7 panels to make and they're all identical, I thought it would be worthwhile to make a jig. So I took a piece of scrap particle board and laid out the perimeter. Here's the bottom, here's one side, a line across the top, and on the other side. Then I took some scrap pieces of lattice and fastened them to the particle board as spacers for the lattice pieces that run in this direction. Each piece is cut long enough so that it exceeds the layout lines. Now the lighter pieces are actually a 1/2 inch thick, and they are the spacers for the lattice that runs perpendicular to the first set. Okay, now with all the pieces in the jig, I'm going to secure the overlapping intersections with a brad. Now I just transfer the line onto the lattice and trim it off. Good. Now I thought it would be worthwhile to pre-prime the groove on the frame, otherwise it's going to be difficult to paint later. Now all I have to do is slip the frame parts around the lattice, and I'll secure each corner with a screw. Then there'll only be 6 more panels to build. To make the decorative arches, I returned to the jig that I used to make the railings. The arches are a little bit wider and shorter than the railings, so I had to establish new lines for the sides and a new line for the bottom. I also installed this plywood block with a dowel pin in it so that I can use my router to actually trim out the arch. I've pre-cut the pieces of lattice a little bit longer than what I need, and we'll just set those in place. As I place the lattice in the other direction, I'm adding a spot of waterproof glue at every intersection. And that's because the decorative arch does not have as much support as the railing. Now, you might have noticed that I'm holding my brad nailer at an angle when I drive the brads. That's because the smallest brad for this nailer is 5/8 of an inch. If I held it straight, the brads would go through. By holding it at an angle, they won't. Well, now for the router to cut a perfect half circle. I've attached this extension base, which is a homemade one that I used for a project earlier. You can buy these made out of acrylic material from your woodworking catalogs. I want to drop the base over the pivot point, and I've installed a 3/8 inch spiral cutting bit in the router. And because I'm going to be cutting across the end grain of a lot of these pieces, I want to take my time, but it works great. Well, just as with the railings, I'm trimming the edges with my small circular saw. To finish off the inside of the arch, I've ripped a piece of cedar that's a little over a 1/2 inch wide, and it's 3/16 of an inch thick. I've rolled on some waterproof glue. I'm going to try to bend it around the inside of the arch and hope that it doesn't break. Good. Now I'll fasten it in place with some brads until the glue sets. Okay, now we'll put a little piece of trim right here. Now this is just a temporary piece that I'm putting across the bottom of the arch. This trim wants to make it spread out. We'll remove it when I install it at the gazebo. Okay, there's one. 6 more to go. Now it took a little time to make the jigs to form these panels, but in the end it saves time. Now the next piece that has to go in is this filler piece that goes from the top of the lower panel up underneath the arch. Now there's another piece that goes on the inside at the top of the arch. Now another filler piece down the side of the arch lattice panel. And the final filler piece goes on the inside of the railing panel. All those fillers give me a uniform surface against which the screen panel will sit. Well, you know, our gazebo can also be called a summer house, which means people are going to want to use it during the summertime. To keep the bugs out, I've come up with a system of screens, and I made those in the shop. Going to the screen shop to have screens made can be expensive, but if you know a couple tricks, you can make custom screens in your own workshop. Now, I've joined parts of screens together in the past using these corrugated fasteners. You drive them across the joint. Sometimes they go in successfully, sometimes they split, and they're very difficult to drive if you hit a knot. Now, that technology has been replaced by biscuits or plate joinery. These beechwood biscuits, combined with the 1-part waterproof glues, will make a joint that's indestructible. Now, to make the slot for the biscuit, you need a biscuit joiner. And inside there's a blade. As you push the machine forward, it cuts a slot the right size for the biscuit. The layout is done by just putting a pencil line across the joint where you want the biscuit. Now this little device allows me to place the glue in the biscuit slot. I could also paint it in with the brush. Now we can clamp it together. You've seen me do this countless times. Check for squareness. 88 9/16 across that diagonal. And across this one, we have 88 3/8. So I got to knock this corner down just a little bit and check it again. That's perfect. After assembling all 7 screen frames and allowing the glue to dry, it was such a nice day that I took the frames outside and applied the final coats of paint. It's a lot easier to do that first before setting the screen fabric. Now what I want to do is put the fabric on, and to do that I'm going to start by setting the screen frames end to end. You notice I need to have 2 frames at a time to do this. Now the screen fabric is fiberglass, and I found that it's less expensive to buy a 100-foot roll rather than the individual pieces. I really only need about 60 feet, but I'll have some spare one around should I need to make a repair. I roll it out to the end of the frame and square it up, roll it over the edge, and attach it with a few temporary staples. All right, now I can go down to the other end and with a nice sharp mat knife cut it off a couple inches longer. And roll it over this edge and staple it. Now if you think that's tight, here's the trick. I'm going to raise this screen up so that I can take a scrap piece of stock that's about 1 inch wide and put it in between the 2 screen frames. Now if I let the screen back down again, it's going to stretch the fabric so that it's nice and tight. Look at how tight that is. Now I'm going to staple along the edge about 3/8 of an inch in from the opening every 6 inches. Now these staples won't show. They're going to be covered with the molding, which is the next step. Okay, with the last staple in place, I can separate the screens and put the moldings on. Good. Okay, I started out by cutting all the pieces of molding a little bit longer than what I need because I'm going to miter the corners. Now this piece of molding was picked up at the lumberyard and it's called screen molding, sort of a modified half round. To make the miters, I'm going to use my lightweight miter box that has a really fine blade. That makes a nice clean cut. To hold the moldings in place, I'm using a brad about 3/4 of an inch long. Now here at the mid-rail, I'm using 2 pieces of molding, and no attempt is made to miter it, just a butt joint. And I'll leave this screen material in the center. Now here around the perimeter, I will trim off the excess fabric. Okay, 1 down, 6 to go. The screen door is made using the same techniques that I used for the screen frames, except that I'm using 5/4 stock instead of 3/4 stock, and I'm using double biscuits at the joints for extra strength. Okay, that's nice and square. Now I'll set it aside to dry, put the finished coats of paint on it, and apply the screen fabric the same way I did with the screen panels. Now before I can install the screens, I need to put in 1 more piece of trim on the inside. I've installed a couple pieces of scrap wood at the top on each side against the posts. And now I'm going to put this piece of 1x10 in and nail it in place. The top of each screen slips under the piece of trim that I just installed. Then I push it up against the lattice and center it in the opening. And it'll be held in place with nothing more than a piece of 1/2-inch quarter round, which is secured with some 1-inch brads. Well, now for the door. The door will be in-swinging, but I have to set some stops up against it which it'll close. So there's a piece of 5/4 pine that gets set up at the top. Now on the hinge side of the door, I've already mortised some galvanized hinges into the post, but I need a piece of trim against which the door will close. Another piece of 5/4 up against the corner board. And on the latch side, another piece of 5/4. All the pieces will be secured with some stainless steel nails. Well, all right, that should keep the bugs out. Now on the outside, there's a couple more pieces of trim to complete. Around the bottom, there's a 1x6 skirt board that's cut at 22.5 degrees on each end. Now to dress up where the skirt board meets the flooring, a piece of scotia molding. Now just below the soffit, I'm installing another 1x6 all the way around the gazebo. This is known as a frieze board. The angle that I've cut at each intersection is the same as I used on the water table, and it sits on top of the corner board. The final piece of wood is this one, a cornice molding, and that's going to dress up the intersection between the frieze board and the soffit. And now for the final touch, a finial. Now I didn't make this in the workshop. It was made by a very talented friend and coppersmith, Paul Spahn, out in California. And it goes right up there. All right. Now this is going to fit right over the top of the shingles. And we'll get it plumb. And I'm going to secure it with some brass screws and some rubber washers to keep the water out. Well, how's it look? Pretty good? Well, now that you know how it's done, I hope that you'll build one.
A production of WGBH, Boston.